Hi, how are you guys doing?
Hi,
Okay, Rob.
good morning.
Good morning. So my name is Robert Voisey. I am the director of Composer's Voice, and today we are here with Lawrence Kramer and Shanelle Woods. Welcome.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.
And we're talking about an upcoming concert that's being presented, Voices Up. But maybe let's start with Larry. Larry, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what do you do?
Okay, well, I have three professional hats. I'm an English professor at Fordham University, which is the locale for the concert series that we'll be talking about. I am a musicologist and been active in that field for quite a long time. If you don't mind a shameless plug, my most recent book, Music and the Forms of Life, will be published by the University of California Press this month. And I'm a composer. So one hat off, one hat on, sometimes several hats together. That's me.
I think we all know that feeling a little bit. And our prominent soprano, how about you?
Hi. Yeah. So a common, as to Larry as well, I think it's common that musicians all wear several hats. So I too am in that arena. I consider myself a teaching artist. So I work full time for the Young People's Chorus of New York City as their education coordinator and teaching voice lessons there. And I also am teaching adjunct voice at New York University. And doing some pedagogy work there as well, and then performing when I am not teaching. So we try to keep ourselves busy these days.
Absolutely. And tell us about this great concert coming up.
Well, the concert is a part of a series that I have been running at Fordham since 2009. And this is a particularly enjoyable one to look forward to because it's a return to form after the COVID hiatus. So this is our kind of back home, welcome back, we're doing it again concert. We have, from the very beginning, all been interested in two things. One is getting together newly written poems, many of them in volumes published by Fordham University Press, which runs this competition called Poets Out Loud. And we have commissioned people to set these excerpts from these volumes to the series. So it's new music, new poetry, for the most part, with all kinds of exceptions, of course, of which the upcoming concert is one. So we try to put these things together, and we try to do art songs in both the traditional way, voice and piano, and in various untraditional ways. We've combined voice with violin and cello. We've combined it with percussion. We've done full chamber ensembles. We do a lot of tinkering with vocal music. And we're always looking for great new talent, like Shanelle. So that's what we're up to. And this particular concert is an initiative which I think is somewhat overdue, namely to get more diversity on our program than we have had in the past. We've been pretty good about that, but it's newly urgent, I think, to reach out and be fully inclusive and realize how much great stuff out there that we've been overlooking for all kinds of not very good reasons. So that's certainly something that we're interested in doing. And Shanelle, you could probably tell a little bit about our search for repertoire, which is one of the interesting things about working both with you and our pianist, Helen Lynn. We went back and forth all kinds of stuff.
We did. We did. Yeah. I think one of the things that appeals to me about the program in general is the wide array of composers and ethnicities and cultures that are represented throughout. So as Larry mentioned, we did go back and forth extensively trying to decide exactly what would be the best fit for this program. I often find that in my teaching, students are constantly wanting to engage with music that helps them explore their own culture as well. And so it's really nice for me to be able to take things back and say, look at these new things that we've discovered together. And so we have a lot of composers represented. It's really nice to see a lot of female representation as well as far as the composers go. We have a Robert Owen set, an African-American composer who set music by Langston Hughes. So there's a really exciting set there entitled Heart on the Wall, which has been scored for orchestra, but we'll be doing it as a chamber with piano and voice. And then we also have Gabriela Frank, a Latina composer, and these poems are derived from the Incan culture. So a lot of variation here as far as the things that you're going to see and hear on the program.
That sounds really exciting. Yeah, I'm always sort of kind of surprised at the wealth of art and music and stuff that we have. I mean, all throughout, the world, but also like just in the United States in itself, and how so very often we keep going back to the same sources, right? It's like, not that Beethoven, Bach, and Mozart aren't great. Okay,
right.
We all love them. They're the greats, gotcha, and so forth. But there's been so much since then, right? I mean,
well, yeah, and if you think back, to those guys, and they were living in musical cultures which are incredibly diverse. Their music was popular in their lifetimes, but it wasn't on every damn program. So in their world, they were a part of a much larger, more vital scene. Why can't we have that? There's so much interesting stuff being done. And once we take the blinders off or the earplugs out, you really realize just how much. And particularly in the United States, I say, speaking from the UK, where I'm here for a week, there is an amazing variety of things from every different conceivable culture of the United States, which of course we have many, thank heaven. And so it's a great initiative to be pursuing. And I mean, I particularly enjoyed getting acquainted with some music that I was completely unfamiliar with, both the stuff we chose and stuff that for one reason or another we didn't choose. It was really a pleasant and educational project.
Well, I always find that's kind of the interesting process. I'm, also as a composer and like going up through the ranks, where it's a very competitive environment, right? It's just, like Bach and Beethoven, Mozart, so they were competing too, and they were doing their thing. And when we don't get picked or don't get selected with this, it's, an obvious deflation, right? We're not happy, but it's not always about, the best of the best of the best, or who's that is. There's like a giant agenda when you're putting together a program. You make compromises and you have an agenda and a mission for your audience, right? I mean, that's the real key. So tell me a little bit about that. So as you're picking these pieces, like, what were some of the factors that you were thinking about, and where did those pieces sort of that we're going to hear sort of meet that?
Okay, Chanel, you want to pick that up first, or would you?
Sure. Yeah, I was just, and sort of piggybacking off of what you guys were just discussing. I think we previously, especially in American culture, we're so go, go, go that while we unfortunately may have lost a few gigs during COVID, it was also nice to sort of have that time to just sit and be and sort of have time to explore some new options and not have to constantly go back to the things that we know. So it was nice to just have that time to actually study and research and think about what could I present that maybe people haven't explored before or been exposed to. Larry actually was the one that found the Robert Owens piece, and I had never engaged with that at all, and then started listening to it, and it's gorgeous. And so even that, just sitting in there thinking, wow, why have I not heard this before? So for me, that was one of the ones I was like, yes, I really want to do this one. I know for me, it's also important that, like I said, we often see a lot of male composer representation. And so I wanted to make sure that like we had some female composers represented on the program. We also have Helen is featured prominently in one of the pieces. She's doing a Margaret Bonds piece as well on piano. So just really trying to pull from things that people may not have been exposed to, but that are surely worthy of our attention. So trying to find those pieces that highlight things that don't necessarily make it into the Western musical canon.
And maybe open the door a little bit wider for them to get in.
Truly, yeah.
My response to the Owen songs was the same as yours. I mean, when I heard them, I thought of, why isn't this music better known? They're
Mhm.
really beautiful songs.
Mhm.
And I think ignoring my own contribution, I think I can say the same about the rest of the pieces on the program. I think we were all, if I can momentarily speak for all of us, we're very taken by the Gabriella Frank pieces, in part because they're very modern sounding pieces, but they have these ancient roots.
Mhm.
So they're drawn from Andean folk songs that go all the way back to pre-Columbian cultures,
Mhm.
and so it's a time as well as a space thing, as well as a culture thing, and the past being a foreign country and all that. That
Mhm.
was, I think, a draw. And if I may speak briefly about my own contribution to the program, um, I, in the course of participating in a citywide festival sponsored by Carnegie Hall a couple of years back called Migrations, The Making of America, which kind of tells you what it was about, I discovered a poem by a forgotten poet named Lola Ridge. And she had published this work in 1918 called The Ghetto. First, it was a poem published, I think it was in the New Republic. And then before the end of the year, it had been put into a book called The Ghetto and Other Poems. And the poem The Ghetto is very, very remarkable. It is a highly sympathetic and firsthand
Mhm.
account of Jewish life on the Lower East Side in that decade. And though Ridge herself was a kind of an ethnic stew. She was born in Ireland, grew up in New Zealand and Australia, moved to San Francisco, and then crossed the country to come to New York, and then promptly moved into this. She was Catholic, so she promptly moved into this Jewish neighborhood on the Lower East Side. Uh, so she's a kind of super cosmopolitan figure, all her own. So when she died in 1940, the New York Times said that she was one of America's most prominent poets, and she was almost completely forgotten thereafter. So reviving this poetry and setting some of it, not all of it, it's a long poem, but to music, was a really intriguing and satisfying challenge to try to meet.
Oh,
Uh,
you're muted.
yeah, you're muted, Rob.
Yes, thank you. That's it's the sort of like lost, forgotten, and then revival. It's like I sort of wonder if in with she died in the 40s, so it's 60 almost. Oh, so is she in public domain now?
Oh yes, yeah. The poem is 1918,
So
so yeah,
I'm
safely
curious.
public domain.
Right. So I'm curious if there'll be like a resurgence just for that, right? I mean, there's
Well, okay, I seem to be plugging myself today, but I guess that's okay.
That's
Uh,
okay.
that's okay.
uh, After I discovered the book, I approached Fordham University Press about republishing it. And so they'll be reissuing an edition, which I annotated and wrote an introduction to, in January. So it will be coming back, and will, at this point, with any luck, gets the attention that it deserves. I mean, Ridge was not only uh, unusual in her kind of celebration and also problematization. The poem is very astute politically as well as expressive poetically
Mhm.
about what it's like for immigrants to have come to America in 1918. And it turns out it isn't very different from what it's like for immigrants to come to the United States in 2022.
Mhm.
Uh, but she was also, and I think this is one of the reasons that she was neglected later after her death, she was a passionate supporter of the American labor movement. And there are some kind of epic quality poems in the volume which are about labor and its struggles and its turmoils. And if you think it's just kind of political grandstanding, it isn't. They're really good poems, very powerful, very forceful, very passionate, and so I don't think that fit very well into the climate of post-war United States, particularly in the early 1950s. So hopefully we'll get her back.
Well, that's sort of this tightrope that we all sort of
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, should we talk about politics a little bit? I said so. Let's talk about music politics. We'll talk about diversity.
Yeah.
I feel like that is kind of been a political football lately, of which there's a lot of things that we've been talking about. It's like, well, this isn't really new. It's happened before. It's happened again. It's stuff like that. And I feel like there's progress being made forward, but there's a lot of steps back, and then we got to like come forward again and come back, like, yeah. And so how do you guys feel about that? Do you feel like it's like about time, like necessity, or is it, could it be a hindrance?
I think me personally, I feel like part of me is like, yeah, it's very much about time to start addressing these issues. And again, I think a lot of this came to a head during that season. We were all at home and sort of forced to confront a lot of this. And as I'm engaging with different musical communities that I am a part of, like I also hear that feedback when people are maybe scared to try new things or feeling like I don't want to do it the wrong way and I don't want to risk offending anyone. But I even myself, right, in thinking about preparation for this program, I am not Jewish, right? And I am trying to engage with this music. So I think sometimes we just have to be willing to step out onto the ledge and explore and see what happens, because you are shining a light on something that may have been forgotten, as in the case of Lola Ridge. And there may be mistakes, but I think it takes a willingness to say, like, okay, I tried this. I'm going to own this mistake. Now, if someone else who's more well-versed in this can show me how to do it better, great, let's move forward together. But I think there has to be a willingness to step forward in some way.
Yeah, amen to all of that. I think that really is critical, that we don't want to confine ourselves to the areas of our narrow identifications, our narrowest identifications. So speaking of this poem, which is written, of course, by somebody who is both an insider and an outsider. She's a woman who, like the people in the ghetto back then, was working hard and earning a pittance, living in a tenement, navigating these incredibly crowded streets. So she's, very much a part of the community, but on the other hand, she's not Jewish. And I wrote the settings of the poem, but I don't live in 1918. And you can't actually underestimate that difference. It's a completely different world that we live in now than they lived in then. So there's a flight of imagination to go back, even though nominally I should be able to do that because my own heritage is Jewish. But that doesn't actually give me the key to life on the Lower East Side in 1918. It's both remote and near. And the last thing I think that we want to do is to forbid ourselves from extending imaginatively and empathetically into areas not our own. Now, there are some contexts in which it's more sensitive, and that does require a kind of openness and willingness to negotiate and to say who has the best and most reliable authority to say and do what. But I think that flexibility about that is absolutely necessary if we're to flourish, and that's what we want, right? We want to circulate the most exciting, the most challenging, the most expressive music or art or literature, whatever, that we can.
Yeah, I think it's really kind of a lot about honesty and effort, right? And having a dialogue, and if you are, then that dialogue happens. And I'm a big believer of it's okay to make mistakes,
right?
Yeah, if it weren't okay to make mistakes, we'd all be in much bigger trouble than we're
right.
Right. Try not to make them more than once. It's even then, like you said, it's effort, right? And sometimes you bang your head against the wall a little bit, but that's all right. You'll get it.
You'll get it. And I think too, even in highlighting maybe some of our differences musically, we've always all considered music to be this very uniting common language. I think too, it also highlights like, oh, maybe these people are different than me or had a different experience than me, but you are able to find similarities, whether it be time or culture, whatever the differences is. You start to see little bits of yourself in some of these stories. So I think it's worth the exploration just for that moment of self-discovery even.
Well, I mean, for me as for a composer, music is a lot about communication and
Hmm.
connection,
Hmm.
and on a level that's like it's more about feeling, right?
Right.
You get encompassed by sound.
Hmm.
Yes, there are words and the different timbres and things and so forth, and the way that it's done definitely speaks a language, right? But there's also something just inherently that's like it's hard to put your finger on, and you make that connection with your audience and with others, and
Hmm.
then hopefully that brings us all together, at
Yeah,
least if
hopefully.
for a moment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, the funny thing is that when you think about the music that you surround yourself with, or the various musics that you surround yourself with, because we all live in different musical cultures simultaneously. But even if you confine yourself to just one, for the sake of argument, like the classical music world, we tend to forget that the things that are so familiar to us, that this is the music I am familiar with, that I like, this is my music, actually comes from an incredible diversity of sources, from people who belong to countries who are other countries and deadly enemies, for decades or centuries,
Hmm.
um, and that we are actually navigating difference without knowing it, and it would actually be more beneficial if we would be a little bit more aware of it. The imaginative effort required to really grasp what is being expressed and to recognize exactly what you just said, Rob. The fact is that underneath, the music has that power to bring us into a kind of common fold. And very different kinds of feelings, very different kinds of expression can do that. But there's something about the sound and the way in which music builds itself up out of these elemental sounds, that draws us together, or is at least capable of drawing us together,
Hmm.
in a way that we'd be happy to affirm.
And and with that, let's talk about a different type of communication. So we've had the pandemic, of
Hmm.
which maybe Chanel, you talked about a little bit about like sort of reevaluating because you've had more time.
Hmm.
So we all got trapped in our houses. Probably for Larry and I, didn't affect us too much. We just sit in our caves and write, right? But so what were the things that you were facing, and then we'll start talking about like this internet sort of interview
Oh yeah.
performing thing.
Absolutely. I think it boiled down to communication, as you so beautifully summarized it earlier. That is so much of what music is about, right? And so we were all faced with how do we still communicate through our screens when we're not able to physically be with one another? It was really interesting, I think, just as a community, as a member of the musical community, to watch the creative ways that people were able to come up with to do some of that, whether it was live streaming events and doing different video projects. All of that was really interesting. I think we all learned more about digital production than we ever expected to, or maybe even wanted to learn. But all of that was such a learning period. But also, we were trapped at home. And again, like our country, I think, was also going through a bit of emotional slash racial upheaval that we were forced to confront because you're not going to work every day. You're not going to a gig. You have to sit and deal with the elephant in the room. So it was interesting also to see how that affected again our musical communities and how we were sort of saying like, well, how can we be more inclusive now? How can we actually address this issue that's sort of been pervasive for the last hundreds of years, and we just have said, okay, well, that's just the way it is, let's just keep going. um, so yeah, it was really interesting to me to even find new communities through online platforms and to reach out to people in different ways. I did more online teaching than I ever expected to do in that time period. And I think that even tests you in a different way. There would be times when I couldn't even see the student. It would just be completely audio. And, you're learning new things about your ear training. All of that was just such an interesting learning curve and an interesting time period. I'm very much glad to be able to do things in person again. But I will admittedly say that there are parts of the pandemic that I miss and parts of that creative connection. I think it challenged us in a different way. I think we were all out of our comfort zones and that it was good for us.
Yeah, I think my own reaction is actually quite similar. I found that the use of digital communications to do things that I would normally do in person, like teach,
Mm-hmm.
actually challenged me in ways that I did not anticipate. It taught me some things about my own teaching that I could either embrace or alter, depending on how well it was working. I ended up quite enjoying doing Zoom classes, particularly with smaller groups. It was
Mm-hmm.
one of the best classes I've ever taught. In fact, was in terms of our forming of a community and creating dialogue. Was a grad course called Autobiography in Politics, which I did totally online, and it was really really good. And I think that there was just enough of us so that we were all on screen at the same time. And so we could all see each other's faces in a way which in a classroom you can't, even if you're sitting around a seminar table. And that made a difference, and it was a positive difference.
Mm-hmm.
So though I'm very glad to be back in the classroom right now, it is nice to actually be in person with people. There were things resources that came out of necessity during the pandemic that at some point we might in fact do by choice. And in fact, I was just given a choice whether to attend an event later in the month, virtually or in person, and I chose virtually. I thought it would be better that way. So that learning curve sometimes leads to good places.
Yeah.
And I also learned a lot about digital production too, because I did digital composing projects, of which Rob is familiar, because one of them was with him. But that was also quite a nice expansion of the kind of horizons of our, expressivity and creativity that was there before, but we weren't reaching out to it quite as much because
Mm-hmm.
that force of necessity wasn't pushing us.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, I'm happy about the necessity change.
Mm-hmm.
You know, part of like the things that I was doing, definitely towards the end of the pandemic was realizing that musicians focus on being musicians, and I get that. But there's a lot of technology and stuff that, it's a new age. It needs to
Mm-hmm.
be embraced.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a whole slew of stuff that kind of comes with it that, part of your career and just doing the job is like, tweeting and liking and
Right.
just getting the word out and making sure, this is, your website's updated and stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
doing online interviews and stuff like that.
Yes, exactly.
And it's funny because I would say the music field has kind of resisted it. I remember anyway, a very New York thing. I was at an underground dinner club party, whatever. I don't know, just friend, was a chef, and he's like, doing a special meal for like all these people that are coming to eat his food. And it was a whole like slew of artists there and so forth. And I was watching some Broadway actors talk about or lamenting, and this is about 10 years ago, just lamenting about how they have to like tweet, every day about the rehearsals and take a picture and do all this and so forth and everything. And that's what, when they got hired for the job, that was what they were expected to do. Mm-hmm. And if they didn't do it, maybe they wouldn't get picked next time.
Mm-hmm.
But we as musicians have only just got onto that bandwagon.
Yeah.
Right? Wouldn't you think? Yeah.
I think it's really interesting how social media sort of infiltrated how we function as musicians and performers. Because it's no longer just about the audition, right? It's about like, what is your online presence and who is that personality as well? One of the things I'm always thinking back on also is our awareness of our mental health and just being and our levels of self-care during the pandemic also. And so I think social media can negatively contribute to that, right? Because it's not a real representation of who you are or how you might be feeling that day. And then that was also kind of removed once we weren't doing all of these public events. So it was interesting that we all had to take that step back and say, how do I actually take care of myself within this field, right? That is also notorious for pushing people to the brink sometimes. So it's been an interesting like learning curve, but also a step inward and self-reflection, and like how does the social media and all of that balance to actually present a well-balanced, healthy individual who can still do this job and remain consistent in this field.
Yeah, I wonder.
I don't know yet, but if you find out, let me know.
Well, you think about it.
We'll send you a tweet.
Yeah,
when you find out. Yeah.
I mean, because like one of the things that, like, I think about that, again, you're like, well, has this happened before? Oh yeah, like TV, right? I mean, TV and radio, and there was always like, the public persona,
right?
And you'd be like, oh, this person is that. Like, one of my best experiences growing up was reading The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, and we read it and so forth. And we go into the class and we were just talking about the poet, right? And everybody was talking about how he was crazy and kind of a murderer, and I was like, dudes, he wrote a poem. It's got nothing to do about like, his inner mind, like wanting to go out and like, to stab somebody in the heart. No, it's a poem. Yeah, sure. He's definitely channeling emotions and this and that could be, if there's any sort of reality on it. Right. But in the end, this is art. This is that. And I feel like I get the sort of interest and want for people to connect, right? I mean, that's really what it is I was speaking to an actor, of which I forget his name, and they were just talking about signing autographs or taking selfies and so forth. And he was just like, it's about the people connecting, right? And that's just a very personal way for them to do that. And I feel like the internet has brought everybody like really closer to home, which is good.
For better or for worse.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. I think what we're talking about is the fact that artists of all kinds, I mean, Poe's a great example because he was actually very good at it, cultivating this public image, which was not exactly who he was. But we'll have to create these alter egos, these public personas. And it's been going on, ever since the rise of mass culture. So for a couple of 100 years, right? But the thing about digital doing it, and the thing about the social media and one's website, is that a lot more of the responsibility or the opportunity falls on the artist, him or herself, right? Whereas previously you've had squads of people telling you do this, do that. This is your responsibility. You've got to create this image, and you have to decide how close that image is going to be to the private image of yourself, or how many of these personas you're going to have. It's a whole new ball game. It's a whole new project. And talk about making mistakes. We all stumble a bit in trying to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never really thought of it that way. Of sort of, it is definitely a democratization of like the field, right? Before there was like a definite path, and there were people who managed it. This is how they do it, and so forth. This is the way, and so forth. Now it's definitely a free for all, and there are people who like have a very polished, refined public persona that is like managed and whatever and so forth, and either from one person or many, to where people are just really out there and honest, and it's getting more difficult to know the difference, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think in our field too, especially with other operatic or classical musicians that I've talked to, feel like they have to maintain that image in a certain way. And as we're exploring what even is classical music, who gets to participate in it, is it this elitist thing? And then within that, if you are an artist who is operating in a classical or an operatic fashion, how true to yourself can you actually be, right? Do you still have to fill this preconceived mold that maybe sort of existed before, or is some of those layers sort of shedding away now, and you're allowed to be a little bit more of yourself as we attempt to bring in new audiences and engage new theater goers?
Yeah, but those old assumptions really need to go.
Yeah,
They are no good for anybody, really.
right, right.
Yeah, you kind of preempted my question because I was going to say, is opera really for the elite these days? What is that?
You
Like,
know, I don't know that we have an answer. I think we're still figuring that out, it feels like. And, and I'm all for not knowing the answer right now, because I think even that signals that we're aware that something needs to change, even if we can't pinpoint exactly what it is all the time. There have been a lot of good points brought up. We're starting to see more representation. I mean, the fact that the Met opened with Fire Shut Up in My Bones last year was like such a huge moment for me culturally, just to be able to be a part of that and to witness that. So I think we're definitely headed in the right direction, but I like that we're sort of in this undefined place because it sort of leaves us open to possibilities.
Yeah, and one of the things about that Met's good decision to do that is that it demonstrated, in fact, since they sold out the
Hmm.
production, is that opera is basically a popular art form. That you do not have to belong to any sort of elite to enjoy it. Particularly, since for the past 30 or 40 years, we've had titles. You don't even have to worry about the language barrier anymore.
Hmm.
And so it's a vital form. And of course, that's the way it always was historically. It was not an elite form at the time that most of the canonical operas were written.
Right.
And part of the problem there is simple economics. I mean, opera houses depend on donations from wealthy donors, and wealthy donors tend to disproportionately reflect social inequalities. So
Right.
you have this skew, which we need to kind of resist,
Hmm.
pull back from it. And one of the ways that we are, I think, very intriguingly, very effectively resisting it collectively in the musical community is by moving away from grand opera into chamber opera, which can be produced much less expensively by
Hmm.
smaller ensembles and appeal directly to various communities. If you don't have to invest millions of dollars in a production, you can afford to take risks. And so there's a lot of creativity there, a lot of adventure there. And so sure, John Adams can write a new Antony and Cleopatra opera, and it'll be performed all over the opera houses of the world. And we'll either love it or hate it. I think Adams's other operas are very interesting, very challenging. It's great. But, first of all, we can't all have that opportunity. And we shouldn't need it. I mean, these forms that are developing are, I think, just as exciting in their potential to reach out to audiences, grab their attention, bring them into the kind of shared excitement of drama. All we need to do is keep pushing in that direction. Uh, and I think that's a hopeful sign. It's a really creative intervention where 25, 30 years ago, chamber opera wasn't on the map, but it is now.
Hmm.
absolutely. Excellent. Well, ladies and gents, this was very pleasurable. What I might just ask you to do is if you could maybe just repeat just a little bit of who you are and what you are by also saying your name. That would be
Right.
awesome.
Okay.
Sure.
Chanel, why don't you start?
Hi, I am Shanelle Woods. I am based here in New York City, and I am currently the education coordinator and a voice teacher at the Young People's Chorus of New York City. And I also spend whatever free time I have left as an adjunct professor of voice at NYU. And I participate in performance opportunities like the one we're here to talk about today when they become available. So yeah, that's me teaching artists, performing, and teaching here in New York City.
Okay. I'm Lawrence Kramer. I've for a long time been on the faculty of Fordham University, where I'm a professor. They will be bringing you the program that we are going to be partly talking about today. I have many hats. I am an English professor at Fordham, and I am a musicologist as well. I do scholarly work there. And shameless plug, I have a new book coming out, published this month by the University of California Press, called Music and the Forms of Life. And I'm a composer. Write as much music as I can, whenever I can. And some of that will be on the program.
Great. Well, thank you both. I don't know if you had any other questions or topics or things you wanted to plug or.
I mean, I got in plugs for both of my new things, so I'm pretty happy.
Shanelle, you got anything like on the horizon?
Anything? Just hoping that I see you all on October 19th at 7:30 for this Voices Up program. And if any of you are watching from South Carolina, or if you're down that way, I'll actually be there next week with the Charleston Symphony Orchestra for their opening pop season of the concert. It'll be a fun evening. We're doing a music of the movies theme. So if you enjoy those old movie musicals, we'll get a little Moon River in there and some other classics. So if you're down in the Charleston area, you need some beach time, that's where I will be next Wednesday through Friday. So you could meet me down there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, guys, thank you again for this. And we'll look forward to more.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, likewise. We're really pleased to do this.
Absolutely.